It is a pleasure to be speaking with folks in Pakistan again. I have done a lot of work around the biology curriculum in Pakistan, but it has actually been some time since I've really engaged with Pakistani curricula or teachers, and I'm really glad to revisit this. I have the poster here that Rashid sent along advertising. So I think I should probably stick to what is here. And I want to kind of give you a little bit of information about where I'm coming from, my background, and how I got into this kind of topic. But I realized that the abstract here makes a claim that I need to address at some point as well, that evolution is the central principle that underlies and unifies the modern biological sciences, and that it is not a controversial scientific topic for the scientific community. So we're going to address that, and we'll definitely talk about the differences between Pakistani and United States educational context. And I think I need to talk a little bit about the way that the separation of church and state plays out in both countries, and how this has been contentious in the United States, and how Pakistan is actually quite a bit more comfortable a place to teach evolution with respect to students' religious identities and understandings. So let's go ahead and get into this a little bit. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I am a biology professor at Syracuse University in the state of New York. If you're familiar with United States geography, we have the state of New York right here. New York City is way down here, what we call downstate. The rest of it is called upstate, and I'm in central New York, right here where this orange star is. And you get a little bit of an idea of what our campus looks like here. But I haven't always been a professor at Syracuse. I haven't always lived in New York. United States is a fairly large country, and it is very diverse in its geography and the kind of culture that you find in different states and regions. So I was actually born, you can see where the stork delivered me. I don't know if that is a common kind of mythological euphemism for delivering of babies, but I was brought to Jonesboro, Arkansas. So this is my home state where I was born, and you can see it in relation to the other states of the United States, and here's New York here. Now that's actually kind of significant to the topic today, because Arkansas has been at the center of a lot of the disagreements and arguments in court cases around the teaching of evolution in the United States. So I was born here in Arkansas. That's where I was raised. I attended my undergraduate university at a conservative Christian religious university. It's called Harding University. And then I moved on to other things. I earned a degree in biology here at Harding with a minor in Bible, and then decided that I really needed to be somewhere else, because I was very interested in the foraging ecology of sea otters. So I went out to Portland State University in Oregon, pretty far away from Arkansas, and far away from where I am now in New York, out on the western coast of the Pacific Ocean here. And I earned a graduate degree in biology there. I'm also very interested in geology, and I earned a second graduate degree at Mississippi State University. So back down here in the South, closer to where I was born and raised, and earned a graduate degree in geology, or really rather geosciences at Mississippi State. I was teaching biology and sciences in community colleges and universities for a while. and started to see that students had some real cognitive difficulty understanding biology as a unified discipline if they didn't understand key concepts like the central dogma, transcription, translation, DNA, those kinds of things, but also ecological concepts like the flow of energy through ecosystems, the recycling of nutrients, those kinds of things. But also evolution was a key thing that kept students from understanding biology as unified. So I went to a place called McGill University in Montreal, Canada, to get a PhD working in the Evolution Education Research Center, which was at the time a partnership between McGill and Harvard University. And it's from there that I went on to Syracuse. Now, I know I have a statement in the abstract that places evolution as central and unifying and non-controversial in science. So I feel like I need to back that up a little bit. Now I'm going to do a thing that's not necessarily all that scientific. I'm going to appeal to authority a little bit. But when I'm looking at something so broad as evolution that deals with evidence from so many different scientific fields, it's important to understand what the experts who have examined the evidence from those fields have come down to agree upon. So I'm going to show you a statement from 67 national academies of science representing countries from around the world. Now, academies of science are generally the top scientists in their field who advise the governments of various countries on matters of science and technology. There's a really great statement that has come from an inter-academy panel that sums up what the national academies from these different countries can agree upon. So I'm going to give you a bunch of words here are known as evidence-based facts. All right, so this is directly from this statement. It says, we agree that the following evidence-based facts about the origins and evolution of the Earth and life on this planet have been established by numerous observations and independently derived experimental results from a multitude of scientific disciplines. Scientific evidence has never contradicted these results. Now, here we go. They're going to list some things that are evidence-based facts that they agree upon that scientific evidence has never contradicted. And this is what they agree upon. That in a universe that has evolved toward its present configuration for some 11 to 15 billion years, our Earth formed approximately 4.5 billion years ago. They also agree that since its formation, the Earth, its geology, its environments has changed under the effect of numerous physical and chemical forces and continues to do so. They also agree that life appeared on Earth at least 2.5 billion years ago. Sure, maybe older, but everyone can agree at least 2.5 billion years ago. And since its first appearance on Earth, life has taken many forms, all of which continue to evolve in ways that paleontology and the modern biological and biochemical sciences are describing with independently confirming with increasing precision. Commonalities in the structure of the genetic code of all organisms living today clearly indicate their common origins. So these are evidence-based facts, never contradicted by scientific results, that the National Academies of Sciences for all of these countries have agreed upon. Now, there are more than 67 national academies, countries, excuse me, but some countries don't have academies. So we have the Academy of Sciences for the Developing World here and the African Academy of Sciences, which has member scientists representing those countries that do not have their own national academies. And I find it interesting that all of these national academies with their top scientists have no problem agreeing to those statements as being evidence-based facts, never contradicted by scientific results, because it's very difficult to get a bunch of scientists to agree on anything, but they agree to this. And I also think it's interesting to look at the countries here. Of course, you have the American Academy of Sciences and the Canadians. Lots of Europeans represented here. But we also have the Academy of Scientific Research and Technology of Egypt, the Indonesian Academy of Sciences, the Academy of Sciences of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Turkish Academy of Sciences, the Academy of the Kingdom of Morocco, the Palestine Academy of Science and Technology, and the Pakistan Academy of Sciences, signing on an agreement to this. Now, I find that very interesting because we have this kind of global cross-cultural agreement among the scientific community to these very clear statements about evolution. So let's come back to the United States then. If we have kind of scientific consensus on this, what do American professional organizations hold as the role of evolution in biology courses? Well, our largest professional organization for biology education is the National Association of Biology Teachers. And according to Wayne Carley, its executive director, evolution is the cornerstone and the building block of modern biology. It should be the centerpiece of modern biology education. And the official statement of the National Association of Biology Teachers is very specific. It says, as stated in the American Biology Teacher, their peer-reviewed journal, by Theodosius Dobzhansky, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. This often quoted assertion accurately illuminates the central unifying role of evolution in nature and therefore in biology. They go on to say, whether it's called creation science, scientific creationism, intelligent design theory, young earth theory, or some other synonym, creation beliefs have no place in the science classroom. Explanations employing non-naturalistic or supernatural events, whether or not explicit reference is made to a supernatural being, are outside the realm of science and not part of a valid science curriculum. That's what the United States professional organizations say about the teaching of evolution and about including non-scientific or supernatural or religious explanations in curricula. And there's particular reasons for this, okay? So if we wanted to think about teaching creationism or religious explanations for the diversity of life, is that actually legal to do in public high schools in the United States? And when I say public, I mean those that are supported by our government and public taxes. So is that legal? Could we even teach about special creationism in our schools? And the answer might surprise you. The answer is yes, but don't quote that. We have to have some qualifiers here. All right, so we have to add clear indication that we're talking about creation. You can't teach creationism as factual or science or, well, let's break this down. Okay, you have to maintain in the United States the separation of church and state. So you can teach about creationism, but you have to do that in the proper context. That means you can't teach it as a science. You could teach it in a social science course or a humanities course or in a comparative religion course, where you're talking about the different things that people believe across the different kinds of religions that there are. It can't be devotional, it can't be discriminatory, and it can't be intended to promote any particular religion. It can't be used to disparage evolution, and it can't be presented as a scientifically valid alternative to evolution. If you maintain all those things, you could teach about creationism in the United States, but you have to adhere to these things to maintain the separation of church and state. All right, so let's go back to where I'm from. This is Arkansas again. That is my high school that I attended so many years ago that I actually had hair and played football, American football. Um, that was a very different kind of experience to what a lot of students have in the United States today, because my biology education, my evolution education was shaped by a lot of cultural rifting, kind of contentious legal court battles over the teaching of evolution and the teaching of creationism that played out in and around my home state. You might be familiar with some of these court cases. Perhaps the most famous is the 1925 Scopes monkey trial, where there was actually a law that made it illegal to teach evolution in the state of Tennessee and several other states, including my home state of Arkansas. They're called Butler Acts. And in 1925, a teacher named John Scopes was convicted of breaking that law by teaching evolution. And that was actually what the people wanted to happen, who put John Scopes in this position, because they wanted to challenge the legality of the law itself that made it illegal. The thing is, the judge kind of made a mistake in the fine that was levied against him. So it didn't actually go to appeal. And the laws that made it illegal to teach evolution remained on the books in Tennessee and many other states like Arkansas until 1968. That's a long time. And in my home state, people started to think about what's going on here, because between 1925 and 1968, we had something going on called the Cold War. The United States was kind of embroiled in this contest with Russia and other countries. And in the 50s, when Russia launched Sputnik into space, the space race was on, and people were very worried that the Soviets were going to beat us at science. So there was this big push to improve our science education, which meant improving biology education, which meant getting the central principle into all of the textbooks. So evolution kind of came into the textbooks across the entire country, and people kind of forgot that it was actually illegal technically in some of these states to teach it. Until in 1968, in my home state, about the time that my mother was graduating from high school, there was a big, huge battle in my home state over the teaching of evolution. They got a person, Susan Epperson, to teach a lesson on evolution. And then basically, because it was illegal, there had to be repercussions. And this case was appealed all the way up to the United States Supreme Court that struck down the law against teaching evolution. The court held that the state, that the statute was unconstitutional on the grounds that the First Amendment to the United States Constitution does not permit a state to require that teaching and learning must be tailored to the principles or prohibitions of any particular religious sect or doctrine. So that made it illegal to make it illegal to teach evolution. So you could teach evolution everywhere in the United States. But that wasn't good enough for a lot of folks who said, well, I tell you what, if you're going to teach evolution, then you also have to teach about creationism. So in 1982, again in Arkansas, there was a big court case about the balanced treatment statute that said that you had to teach creationism anytime you taught evolution to balance it out. But the court said that that was not constitutional, and it further declared that creation science is not, in fact, a science. But that was just in Arkansas. It didn't make it all the way up to the Supreme Court until a few years later. Now, this is when I was going into high school, and this case started in Louisiana, just south of the border of my home state. In this case, which was a huge deal, it was very contentious. The United States Supreme Court held that Louisiana's Creationism Act was unconstitutional. Creation science impermissibly endorsed religion. And that meant that you couldn't do the balanced treatment anymore in the United States. But that didn't stop the court cases. In 1990, we had a case where a teacher said that it violated their free speech rights to ask them to teach evolution. But the court found that the curriculum was sound, solid, and to be upheld, and that holding a teacher to teach the state-approved curriculum was not a violation of their free speech rights. In 1994, this was tested on free exercise of religion, but the courts found that requiring a teacher to teach the state-approved curriculum does not violate their religious freedom. Again, back in Louisiana, we had a situation where a teacher was reading a disclaimer about evolution whenever they taught about evolution, ostensibly to promote critical thinking. But the courts rejected that policy, and also this was notable for equating intelligent design with creation science, therefore not permissible in public schools in the United States. Kept on going. In 2000, Rodney DeLavake said that he wanted to teach the evidence both for and against evolution. But the judge declared that he didn't have any free speech rights to override the curriculum. And it was not a violation of his religious rights either. And then we come to Kitzmiller versus Dover in the state of Pennsylvania, pretty close to me now. This was the first challenge to teaching intelligent design in the public school science classrooms. And the federal judge there determined that intelligent design is not science, that intelligent design cannot uncouple itself from its creationist and thus religious antecedents. And that policy was found to be unconstitutional. The Dover area school board was ordered to refrain from maintaining the intelligent design policy in any school, from requiring teachers to denigrate or disparage the scientific theory of evolution, and from requiring teachers to refer to a religious alternative theory known as intelligent design. Same year, in the state of Georgia, there had been disclaimer stickers warning students against evolution in the state of Georgia in Cobb County, but the court concluded there that those stickers in the science textbook violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to the Constitution, because that would be interpreted as a message of endorsement. They appealed that, and the defense brought in the plaintiffs brought in the expert witnesses from the Dover intelligent design case, and they quickly settled that case without a retrial. And in that settlement, the board and district are barred from making any oral or written disclaimers about evolution or Darwin, from placing stickers in textbooks about creationism, creation science, intelligent design, or any other religious view concerning the origins of life or origins of human beings. And they are barred from excising or redacting materials on evolution in student science textbooks in perpetuity. And they had to pay a lot of money in order to do that. So in summary, there have been a lot of court cases in the United States, a lot of them. It's been a contentious cultural issue for a long time. And the anti-evolution laws and policies have failed every time in the courts. Teaching creationism, whether you call it creation science or intelligent design, in a public school science class, it's not just unlawful, it's unconstitutional. That means you can't make a law to make it illegal to teach evolution or to teach a creationist idea, because that law itself would be unconstitutional. And that goes for any disclaimers or any denigration of evolutionary science on the basis of religion at all. So that's what's been going on in the United States legally, in science, in education. But there's this huge disconnect between what is taught about in schools, or what's supposed to be, there's this huge disconnect between the scientific community and the public in general. We've been doing polls, surveys, and large-scale standardized tests and other quantitative measures of people's understandings and belief about evolution, and they're commonly used to communicate how well we are doing when it comes to science education. A pretty big one that you might see is a comparison of the United States and a bunch of Western countries in the European Union and Japan on the public acceptance of evolution. I know you can't read that figure there. I'll make it bigger. All right. So this is a response to a question about acceptance of evolution, of whether it is true or the respondents are not sure, or whether evolution is false. And the scientists in the United States were very, very, very alarmed to find that the United States is all the way down here at the bottom of evolution acceptance, second only to Turkey. And that made huge news. And then a colleague of mine who is from Pakistan, Salman Hamid, said, if you think that's interesting, you should be bracing for Islamic creationism, he said in pages of the journal Science, and said, you know what, Turkey is actually probably pretty high on acceptance for Islamic majority countries, and published this one that showed that actually Turkey would fall largely ahead on acceptance of evolution of other countries, with Pakistan falling below that. But we had some questions about that. All right, so here's the chart from those countries, including the United States, the European Union, Japan, and this is the question that was asked to them. Human beings, as we know them, developed from earlier species of animals. And that question was kind of construed as being a good one for determining people's acceptance of evolution. So that's how the United States kind of compared to those countries. Now, here is from Hamid in the same journal, Science, looking at evolution acceptance in Muslim majority countries. So you can see where Pakistan falls out. But the question is very different. The question that was asked here was, do you agree or disagree with Darwin's theory of evolution? It's not the same question at all. And there are actually problems with that question, with both of those questions, and certainly with comparing the two of them. We were really wondered about this when I was at McGill, and we tried to figure out, what's going on in all of these countries with large Muslim populations. We actually got a nice grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada to study teaching and learning about biological evolution in the Muslim world. We did a survey and other types of studies in several different countries among Muslim populations, including Muslim populations in the United States and Canada to some extent, but also in Turkey, Lebanon, Egypt, Indonesia, and Pakistan. The data, well, we got 5,500 surveys from Egyptian, Indonesian, Lebanese, Turkish, Pakistani, and Canadian Muslim high school students. We interviewed about 150 Muslim scientists, science teachers, and community members. We had focus group discussions with Muslim teachers. We had discussions with Canadian, Indonesian, Pakistani, Turkish, and Lebanese research collaborators. And we had discussions with Muslim scientists and evolutionary biologists. And we did a survey of biology curricula and textbooks from these countries. It was hard to do, even just to build a survey to ask the same questions in these countries that had been asked in Western contexts. was very difficult. We constructed the survey in English and translated it into Arabic, Bahasa, French, Turkish, and Urdu. We did this through a very difficult process where we actually got translators that were certified by government institutions in these countries to translate our surveys, but we also took those translations and passed them by experts in science and education. Pardon me. The survey measured participants' attitudes toward and scientific and religious understandings of evolution according to a 5-point scale to their agreement to these statements. And if you want to learn about how we put that together, we actually published on that, and I'm happy to share that paper. You can find it on my profile in research. Just the translation was very difficult. Some terms were very hard to accurately translate. Evolution, very difficult, because the word for evolution in Arabic and I believe in Urdu is the same as the word for development. So when we're asking about people's agreement with biological evolution, some people would think of that in terms of their interpretation of that particular word as biological development, as in development from single-celled egg to a fully developed organism. And of course, they would agree with that. The word ancestor was difficult in different contexts, not so much in Pakistan, but it was very difficult in places like Indonesia to make sure that we were talking about biological organisms as ancestral to others. Related was a difficult term when we're talking about biological relationships. And the term supernatural was very difficult when we're talking about religious explanations or those that have to do with spiritual kinds of contexts or things that are, it's very difficult to have the same context across cultures for that particular concept. Because when we're looking at religious explanations in the West, that's kind of understood as supernatural, maybe not necessarily part of the physical world, a spiritual belief, those kinds of things. But within Islam, the idea of natural had to do with, when we talk about supernatural, it meant to a lot of people more like unnatural. And what could be more natural than your religious understandings? And so it was difficult to kind of make that clear what we intended to mean. But we went through this and we got a pretty good survey, and we can tell you about some of our general conclusions here. First, we found that evolution is actually very well accepted among university level scientists in the Islamic countries that we study. But many of those scientists develop very deeply nuanced interpretations of scripture to reconcile evolution and Islam. There were a couple of folks who I am very fond and familiar of, good friends of mine who are part of this effort. One of them is Ihab Abu Hif, who is Canada Research Chair in Evolutionary Developmental Biology. You may know the name Abu Hif if you've ever been to Egypt. Alexandria, the beach there by the library at Alexandria is called the Abu Hif Beach. Ihab's grandfather was the great Abu Hif, the Nile crocodile, probably one of the greatest marathon swimmers of all time. Ihab is a really great guy. He's a wonderful scientist. But he is a devout Muslim, and in his lab at McGill University, he stops his science regularly for Islamic prayer. And he says, my daily scientific activities of performing evolution-centered research do not conflict with my daily spiritual activities as a Muslim. I strongly believe one can practice evolutionary biology without compromising one's faith as a Muslim. Similarly, my good friend, Dr. Anila Asghar, who is from Pakistan, she's a professor of science education at McGill University. And so many times I've heard her say, if Allah can create, then why cannot Allah evolve? Interesting ideas from these folks. And some more of our general conclusions are that evolution is actually very well represented in the curricula and textbooks of the Islamic countries that we studied, although religious content is actually common as well. And that might be due to political necessity, but it's also very important that there's no strict separation of church and state in some of these countries, including Pakistan. So if I look at the goals for science education curricula in Pakistan, in the textbooks that we were reading, the goals that were set up in these governmentally produced textbooks include that students are supposed to come to appreciate that Allah is creator and sustainer of the universe. That's in the front of a governmentally produced biology textbook, most of them actually, and that's something you would never see in the United States. This is a copy of one of the textbooks from Pakistan. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about the presentation in the textbooks that I reviewed was that they did include a lot of scripture. They included a lot of interpretation of scripture, but that was very clearly labeled Islamic concepts. And after the presentation of Islamic concepts, they moved into scientific concepts. Now, this is very, very important. But here, recognize the importance of the, and then coming to conclude that a close study of the above sermons reveals that all animals had common origin, but they gradually underwent changes afterwards and became different from each other. Some developed crawling, started walking on two legs, and some had four. It seemed that animals of today are advanced forms of past animals who achieve this form after passing through many changes. That is very refreshing from my particular context. Pardon me. So we also found that secondary teachers in the Islamic countries that we studied didn't have as much knowledge about evolution as their university level counterparts, which is understandable, but they also didn't have the level of acceptance that their university level counterparts did. And their teaching attitudes, their attitudes toward their, and their practices regarding evolution, they varied greatly between the different countries. In Islamic countries that had high acceptance rates, secondary students had pretty high acceptance rates for some aspects of evolution, very low acceptance rates for others. Human evolution was particularly problematic. Their religious beliefs are an important factor influencing how they perceive evolutionary theory and science in general, and faith often trumps the evidence. Also, students and teachers who represented religious minorities were more likely to hold creationist ideas. So let's come back to this comparison. We already know that the questions aren't exactly the same. So let's go ahead and use our survey and come back to compare actually the same question. And what we find is that Pakistan is actually on top here and Turkey is well below in terms of acceptance of evolution here. Pardon me, I'm losing my voice here. Bad time to have that happen. To blow that up a little bit, it says, and to talk about a different question in general, if we ask this question, human beings as we know them developed from earlier species of animals. This is about what we would expect, but if we change that to take humans out of the equation and just say that fossils show that life has existed for billions of years and changed over time, very high acceptance. Pakistani students, well over 80% acceptance for this particular thing. And if we could see this result in the United States, science educators would be thrilled and would be talking about how much better of a job we are doing with science education. We also found that there isn't just one Islamic way of thinking about evolution. Many Muslims have embraced evolution as a well-evidenced and fundamental principle of modern science. But others have rejected it completely if their interpretation of scripture and religious beliefs conflict with evolutionary theory. But between these two mindsets, there's a whole continuum of position held by Muslims who have reconciled evolutionary theory with religious perspectives on creation. And there's just as much diversity of thought around evolution among Muslims as there is among Christians. You may have known that, but that was surprising to many people in North America. All right, so thinking about that diversity and thinking about the difference between our two different contexts, I hope that we can have a pretty good conversation about your context and how you are presenting evolution, or how we can think about this critically in order to do better in science education in general. I think at this time we were going to have some questions. If you wouldn't mind, could I take just a minute? Think about questions.
Yes,
and
sure.
Okay, I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Hopefully we can have some good conversation and discussion.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much for giving us this enlightening and this entertaining presentation on the issue of evolution. I think discussed. Sir, I would now request my participants to ask questions. The forum is open. You can have our participants, they have two options. They can either raise their hands or they can write their question in the chat box. So I can see that someone is raising his hand. Let me see. Okay. Sir Amir Raja.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sir Amir Raja, can you please unmute yourself and ask the question?
Thank you, Ms. Noshin Rana. Thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to see Mr. Jasson Wiles. I hope that I'm pronouncing his name well. And yeah, thank you. I can see your smile. That means that I have pronounced your name well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed first of all, I'll have to, once again, welcome you, and on the behalf of PAS, being member of the PAS organization, I think it is yet another good webinar and good interactive session, which have been organized by our organization PAS. And I think this is one of the key areas in overall idea of critical thinking that has been actually, long, I would say, haunting us. And it's been a kind of, question that has not only been, a question of great importance for many students of schools, secondary schools, and even early, level learning schools, and even universities, colleges, where these questions are mostly, considered. And I could actually, I could relate myself as well. When I was student of secondary school and I opted biology as my secondary school subject. So being student of biology, I could still imagine that our teachers had always, what I could say, had always, discouraged us, or actually, very systematically, or in a very, prudent manner. What I say, in a very, shrewd manner. May I say shrewd manner? They actually, applied certain ways through which we actually, hesitated, or actually, avoided any possible question that could have actually, led to opening up such debate at school level. And I think when you carry such, ambiguities in your mind, you actually, carry such ambiguities for your rest of life. And later on, actually, I realized that these are the areas which are basically out of bound areas. We cannot actually, treat on such areas, and we must, understand what are our limits in the public sphere, social public sphere, or, socio educational or academic public sphere. So that is my experience. Now, coming to your presentation, you have actually, presented your case by comparing USA's case and Pakistan's case. Though I have very little understanding and little reading about USA's case, I was just, reading some stuff which is available on Google right now, because you see, I wasn't prepared for it. So there was some reference to United American, sort of organization which deals regarding it, American affiliation, scientific affiliation, or something like that was mentioned there. So, they term it a clever design of God through which, creation has actually, taken place, and it is actually, evolving. So, they have somehow reached to certain, conclusion, and reached to certain, understanding, which can actually, open up new avenues of discussion. And this is how actually, they have addressed it. But what is our problem? Now we have very serious kind of, problem, that whenever our teachers, go to the classroom, they say, look, children, understand, this is what science describes about, evolution theory, and Darwin has said so. But remember, we are Muslims, and we cannot, question our faith, belief. They actually draw a binary that science, the discourse of science, or the narrative of science, is basically primarily, it is in contradiction or in conflict with the one which we actually, read and subscribe in our faith, or in our belief. So, I think there is, and you have mentioned in your, talk, that certain, you have mentioned about, legal battles, and there have been certain, legal, verdicts and decrees have been issued by your certain courts, and you have mentioned one of the states as well. So that is not the case here in Pakistan, rest assured. And you have also mentioned a couple of books reference that the sustainer and the creator of whole universe is only, Allah Almighty. And we actually believe in it without any doubt. And that is basically part of our larger belief, and that is a part of our political belief as well, because state has been, propounding it consistently. But there is a question that how we can actually, move on with the idea of, learning in a critical manner, when actually, there has been general universal consensus on the part of all those, people who have been either, doing some stuff in the scientific research or who have been teaching science. I mean, why can't we actually, reach to certain consensus by actually, sitting together? Though we have scientific foundation here, scientific academy you have mentioned, but actually, the debate hasn't been actually there, and the debate is not being allowed to actually, open up, and actually, this is our problem. And I tell you, my question here is that how would you actually, take up this matter when certain level, even in the universities, cannot talk about actually, this particular, issue of evolution.
Oh, okay, I just want to make sure you were okay, because I know sometimes you're not feeling good. So, okay.
So I'm sorry, I lost the train here.
Final. My question is that how would you actually, address this question by actually, by realizing state of discourse in academic learning, that this idea of scientific evolution is not being entertained even by teachers,
right,
or even by the larger intelligentsia of the academia. I mean, how we can actually, engage into this situation to actually, reach to certain, debate first, and then we might reach to certain, consensus. So this is my question to you. I hope that my question is clear.
Okay, I think I understand. It's kind of one of these things where it's a different context, right? So I think it's actually Pakistan is better positioned to have these conversations in your classrooms with teachers and students in conversation, because you don't have the separation of church and state, which must be maintained in the United States public schools. So you have kind of the framework for a good discussion of science and religion. And it's actually there in your texts. And one of the things that we have had very good success with in the United States in terms of helping people to understand religion and become more comfortable with science vis-a-vis religion is to talk about the nature of science itself. How does science work? And that is something that you can do anywhere, right? You can talk about what does science do and what does science not do in terms of testing, in terms of measuring the natural world, and putting those boundaries where science cannot answer questions outside of what you can test and measure against the natural world that you can observe. So we have found that as students start to understand how science works and what science can't do, they start to see it as less of a potential threat to their religious understandings, because they come to understand that science doesn't ask those questions, it doesn't approach those kinds of things, and that in your kind of understanding of religious concepts, science isn't a threat, but perhaps can be a tool for students to say, how can we think about scripture? How can we interpret scripture? How do we think about our religious understandings? And students who know how science works and what it can be used for then can say, well, I have a question. Is that a religious question or is that a scientific question? If it is something where I'm wondering about something in scripture and science tells me that this is true in nature, then perhaps my interpretation of scripture might include what I know to be true from science as well. And I think that you also have in your science textbooks a very clear kind of missive, an exhortation of students to study biology so that they will understand Allah's creation. So that they are free then to think about how do we learn about things scientifically and how that might inform our understanding of our place in the world vis-a-vis our religious understandings as well, without it necessarily being a threat. And I think your textbooks, the ones that I have seen and reviewed anyway, do a very good job of separating out, these are scientific concepts, this is what we've learned from science, and Islamic concepts and teaching. So I think really getting students to understand and teachers to understand how science works, what the boundaries of science are, and that it might not be the threat that they could otherwise perceive to the religious understandings is a good starting point. And I think getting teachers the training on that is a very good thing to do moving into the schools itself. That's one of the things that we don't do very well here either, in terms of teaching teachers about how to teach these difficult concepts. So it doesn't surprise me at all to hear you say that that might be avoided or thought about as something we can't really talk about. It's uncomfortable. So there again, if we can get teachers the training on how science works and how to talk about it with students, then we're going to go a long way to getting toward those discussions that you're looking for. Thank you so much for that question.
Okay, I think Mr. Rami Raja is quite satisfied with the answer. Yes, I can see the smile. Thank you, sir. Okay, Mr. Buland Iqbal, he wants to ask one question. Mr. Buland, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Can you listen me? Hello?
Yes, I can.
I can hear you fine.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Wills. I actually really appreciate your topic and your whole demonstration and a very thorough description about this issue. I would rather ask to you something which is a little different, because I'm just going towards the reconciliation of both the ideology, the evolution and the faith. And for some time, like say, for example, I believe like, okay, let's go with that God creates this open universe through natural process rather than magic God. That's not bad. We can go into that way. And then we can come to the point like, okay, all this physiology, ecology, biochemistry, and all these systemic things is going to be affected with this theory. Okay, that's again good. I'm going to take this way. Then the next step comes. Okay, how does it going to affect? Then we're going to go into the other branches. We can see like the astrophysicians is going to speak about the evolution of the solar system of the universe. That's great. Geologist is going to discuss about the evolution of the Earth interior. That would be great. Psychologist of the evolution is going to psychologist is going to speak about the evolution of the mind, and then anthropologist about the evolution of the culture, and the historian, all by one we can see like all the fashions of the life is going to be discussed in the whole pathway of evolution. That would be great. I am very happy. Now the problem is start. Why take 150 years to establish this theory like a gravity? I feel like the problem starts from the social Darwinism. And my question about that part, how do you take? I know this is not a direct question for a biologist like you, but the problem starts when you're going to start all this theory into the school part. Now the students going to be convinced for the racism, for the colonialism, for the social stratification, which is going to be justified by this theory, and which is what's happening. Now, the next problem is the countries like Pakistan or all those underdeveloped countries, you can see, politically we are behind 100 years, and we have all these issues very in a prime stage to develop. So that theory go into that direction, cause more trouble, that's my problem. So how do you take from your part? I would rather just come to this point. What do you think? Is it that the reason we are not establishing this theory, or something else we are missing? I'm missing here.
Okay, I'm going to try to come around to what I'm understanding as your question. And I didn't know where you were going at first, but now I understand, right? So the concern is not about whether evolution is real or true, or whether we should discuss it, or whether we can talk about it in a way that is constructive, but the threat of perceived negative implications. So if this is true, then perhaps maybe social Darwinism, those kinds of things, right? Racism, those kinds of things that you mentioned. So I think it is true about anything in science that it can potentially be used for inappropriate and maybe even evil. You know, so when you think about something like atomic energy, for example, the scientists who were studying the composition of the atom, nuclear fission and fusion, I think it's easy to say that many of them, if not most or all, were mostly interested in understanding the problem, understanding the universe, how it works, what's going on here. A good scientific, defensible, non-evil kind of approach to understanding the universe. Now, have some people come along and thought of other ways to use the knowledge that was discovered? Yeah, absolutely. I don't know of anyone who would support the idea of nuclear warfare as something we should definitely do. I don't think anybody wants that. Mm-hmm. But does that mean that scientists should never have studied the composition of the atom, or that students shouldn't learn about the composition of the atom, right? So when it comes to things like evolution, which is fundamental to how things work in nature. If we have ecological issues with non-native species, or if we have response to changing agricultural practices, or changing environmental situations according to climate change, our understanding of how evolution works is very informative to these very important real world problems. When we see something like the coronavirus and evolution of new variants that might evade our vaccinations, understanding of evolution is very important to explaining what we might expect and acting accordingly. So I think it's very important that the scientists of today and tomorrow learn about these things that kind of govern the problems that they're trying to solve for all of us, for the good of humanity. Understanding that some may bend those things that are true toward purposes that are not good. And that is the case with everything. So I don't think I want to be in a world where we can't learn about things because some people might use them for ill, but more focus on how we can learn better about the natural world while also teaching people about morals, ethics, and the ways that science can be governed to avoid the things that people may do otherwise. And so when you look at something like social Darwinism or racism, those things are rooted more so in hate than they are in some perception of science as something that drives hate. I think if you have that hate, if you have that bend toward othering people, then you can use whatever that you want to justify that, whether it's science or anything else. So I think that is a good conversation to have with students about whether truth is worth finding, whether exploration in science is worth doing, even though some may choose to use what they find for evil, and thinking about how we can develop people who have a system of values and to teach students about ethics and science governance and those kinds of things that prevent those people from using information for ill purposes. Those are all things that we should do as well. They're not all necessarily science, right? So science is governed by ethics, but ethics isn't necessarily itself science. So we definitely need to have these conversations, avoid something that is valuable and useful in and of itself, because some might choose to apply it in ways that are not appropriate or that are harmful. I hope I've answered the question.
I think Mr. Ghulam has got his answer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate your, thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mr. Jasson, we have next question from a student, Juwaria Aftab, and she is kind of complaining about one thing, that in Pakistan, we only science students, they know about evolution and scientific revolution. How can other students, how can other students from other fields, how can they know about this evolution system and the law of evolution? What do you suggest to them?
Okay, so let me see if I understand the question. If you're studying biology,
yeah,
we can do a pretty good job with this, but how do we teach this for people who might not be studying biology? Okay, I think I get that. So in the United States, that's another thing that's very different. We have this kind of baseline curriculum that includes the sciences, that includes history, that includes mathematics and different areas of study, and everybody has to do this all the way through the end of high school. And even if you go to university, they come back to a core curriculum that includes all those things, as well as your specific discipline that you might specialize in. And I know that that's a very different system than you might find in other countries. And it sounds like Pakistan too, you specialize perhaps relatively early compared to our context. So when I was in Canada, that was also an issue too, because we would find that people didn't really understand evolution, and there were some problems that were going on there. And when we looked into the curriculum, we found that they only taught about evolution in the very highest level biology courses for students who are going to university to study biology. That was a very different context. So how do we make this something that more people can learn about? First, I think it's good to start early. So elementary schools are good places for people to learn about things like adaptation and how organisms can change within their environment as the environment changes. That is something that you can have in the early grades. We can talk about things like the connections between living things in their ecosystems, in their habitats, how they rely on each other, and how they have come to rely on each other through a history that they share. The other part of that, I think, is that all students, regardless of their discipline, whatever it is that they're studying, perhaps it would be a very good idea to talk about science in general and how science works, the nature of science itself, so that when they are, perhaps they are business people, or perhaps they are, in the restaurant industry, or whatever people might do, whatever people might study, if they have some understanding of how science works, when they read an article, or when they see a science documentary, or when they learn some information about science itself, whatever they studied, if they know about how science works, then they can critically evaluate the kind of information that comes in. So I don't think you have to be a biologist to understand how science works as biology is being presented in an article or a documentary or something, that the biologists who do that work according to the science principles, how science works that everyone tends to know. So when you look at even the academies of sciences that I presented early on, they were talking about evidence coming from physics, from biology, from chemistry, from geology, and a physicist and isn't a biologist, but they can understand that their biologists and physicists colleagues practice science in the same way and that the results have been reviewed within that community according to those standards and under the same kinds of guidelines and ethics and practices, so that you can kind of accept science from the scientists that practice science in the way that you do, whether or not you are in that particular field yourself. And I think that probably extends to people who are, in whatever field that there may be. If in the early grades in education, we talk about science itself, how it works, how scientists do the work that they do, then they don't necessarily need to be experts in every scientific field in order to understand that what the people who work in those fields do is rooted in that science that we know how it works. So that's one of my big fundamental things is I hope that we teach about how science works better, whether or not we teach all of the tiny little details of every scientific field.
Thank you, Dr. Jasson. It is well explained answer. Next, we have kind of comment by Marwa Khalid, and she is saying that thinking with understanding of science, then students may get more understanding of this process of evolution. And secondly, she is saying that there is not much difference between the basic concepts of evolution in Islam, what Allah is talking about, and what science is saying. So I want to ask one question related to this point. And why is there a difference of opinion about evolution between religion and science? Why is this clash existing? Why don't they agree upon
Okay,
one
well,
thing?
so first of all, I have to say that many people do not find that clash. And what I find very most interesting is that it tends to be the people who have studied science the most and people who have studied religion the most who are the best at understanding that there doesn't necessarily need to be a conflict. So when people don't know as much about science and when people don't know as much about religion, then it makes it much more easy to have very simplified understandings of both and to expect that one or the other needs to be in conflict with the other. I want to come back to something that Amir Raja has said, that he was talking about the scientific affiliation that he found on Google. That's actually a very good group of scientists who are very religious, who are very open in discussing their understandings and the reconciliation of their science and religion. Another good group is the Clergy Letter Project in the United States, where religious leaders from Judaism and even from Islam, the Imam Letter is building. It's not as big as the other ones. But they are religious leaders who have signed on to very clearly worded statements about their acceptance of evolution, its importance, its centrality, but also confirming their religious faith in the truth of the scriptures and the foundations of their belief, and how these are very different things, but they can also be complementary. One of our good leaders here in the United States, heard of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, a great leader in civil rights, but also was a minister himself, a religious leader. And one of my favorite sermons of all time, it's kind of interesting to hear a biologist talking about their favorite sermons, but I do have a list of favorite sermons, and one of my favorites is called A Tough Mind and a Tender Heart by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in which he talks about how science is very different from religion in terms of its methods and in terms of what they do, where science is about facts and it's about learning about the material world in a way that you have to be tough-minded. But religion has to do with understanding truth of a different nature and about transforming hearts and about having a tender heart and compassion. And that without with only one of them, you end up with a kind of tough-minded way of living that isn't informed by the compassion that you might have from your religious understandings. And this particular sermon is very good at both parsing them out, but also saying that we need the things that come from both of these realms. So I think when you're looking at the idea of people looking for science and religion to be in conflict, so that's where we need to work, I think, because so many people who are scientists have come to understand that perhaps that doesn't necessarily need to be in conflict, and people who have studied religion and have figured out ways to reconcile their understandings as well. So what do we do with the people who haven't studied either or both of those things enough to see the ways that we can be complementary or at least coexist? So that's where we need to have that conversation. And that's why I think in Pakistan, you are so well positioned to do this, because you are able to address religious understandings, Islamic concepts within the context of your scientific courses, and it's laid there in your curriculum. So in a lot of ways, I might ask, how may we be more like Pakistan in terms of having good conversations, or at least having the ability to have these necessary conversations. And the people in my field have come to the understanding that it is important to address students' understanding of the scientific concepts that they might perceive to be in conflict. So, I'm so glad that you have the ability to do this within your framework, but your question is a good one of how do we get to that point of being able to do that effectively when so many people are in the middle and haven't yet had that conversation. So I think it's a good thing to talk about how science works, the nature of science itself, to frame science in the way that it is not a threat to religious understandings, because it can't be. It's outside of the bounds of science to do so. And then have those conversations about what do we learn from science practice in this way, and how can we reconcile our religious understandings with that information. I think it's also part of the media, where it doesn't sell more newspapers, and it doesn't get more clicks, and it doesn't get more advertising if you're telling everybody that we can all get along. We have to sow that conflict in order to make people interested. So I think getting people more interested in how we can come together instead of how we can strengthen our own particular identity against the other. If we can move toward that as a society, then we're going to see less of the conflict that you're talking about.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jasson, for explaining it so well. The topic is very interesting. It is very entertaining, but unfortunately we have we are looking forward to have another session with you. And now I would request Mr. Amir Raja, the president of PAS, to give. This webinar is being conducted by PAS. PAS is Professors Association for Student Services. So he is the president of PAS, so he would give you a word of thanks. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nosheen.
Yes, Mr. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much indeed. Once again, Ms. Nosheen. It was really very informative, and perhaps it was a kind of, session that has actually, brushed, or what I call it, a kind of, intervention that has actually, ideas and stagnant imaginations, which were stagnant and which were, stuck somewhere, perhaps some decades ago. And I'm very grateful to Mr. Jasson Wiles, who is so grateful, who is so gracious, and who is so, what I call that, who has been so, lovely, and who has been so, clear regarding his, speech, and who has been, who has explained in such a, excellent manner that everybody who has actually attended this session, they have enjoyed it a lot. And one more thing, before we actually conclude this session, once again, I have to, appreciate Ms. Nosheen Rana's efforts, who has, moderated this session very nicely, and who has actually, moderated this session in a manner that everybody has enjoyed your talk and everybody has actually learned a lot. And I would say regarding this session that Mr. Jasson Wiles, we live in a society, we live in a world now where there are certain issues, and Mr. Buland Iqbal has referred to that issue. Now we are facing new, terms are being coined under, new notions. There has been no even within, Indian subcontinent, there has been xenophobia, Chinese xenophobia. So the world is unfortunately, heading towards a greater divide. And I think it actually, borrows an ideal that if we actually, try to, subscribe to this notion of scientific learning, scientific, method of understanding things. I mean, there are actually, there is a basically, a very good statement from your side that we need to, teach students, and we need to initially, train our teachers that there is clear dividing line between two different approaches, two different one particular, avenue, which is, and the method of, understanding things is entirely different from the scientific method. The scientific method actually, invites us to look into things from their, specific material existence. So when we are actually, teaching our students and training our teachers that the mandate of science is this, that science actually, always talks about observing things and then, measuring things and then reaching to certain thing. I mean, this is how scientific skills can be, imparted and infused in the minds of those people. I think this is how we can move forward, that we have to, begin first from, scientific discourse of learning, that how we can actually, inculcate this idea of scientific learning discourse in our society or anywhere in the world, because, the whole world is basically, facing somehow some kind of, crisis of, learning on the basis of scientific skills. So this is very nice of you that you have actually, made us to think over it and actually, deliberate over it. And I think it was really lovely once again that you have actually, in a very, candid manner. I think the issue is not that easy, which you have actually, discussed today. I think you might be realizing on your own, because, American, though there are certain, progressive minded, intellectuals and progressive minded, religious people who have reached to certain, consensus, and who have been actually, propagating and promoting this, scientific learning method. But still, American society has its own, dynamics of, subscribing to, conservative, dogmatic approaches to, look at things. So we have our own, crisis here. But I think the way you have candidly handled this situation, and you have actually, highlighted it, and you have actually, made us to actually, move with by some kind of, practical steps through which we can actually, begin this this debate, which can actually, which can be centered on an idea of scientific discourse of knowledge and scientific discourse of learning and teaching. And I think this is a kind of, concluding statement from your side, that I would say, by saying, once again, it was very nice of you that you have spared your precious time and you have shared your ideas. You have actually, made us to actually, deliberate on this topic, through which we can actually, promote the very, the big theme of our organization, that we have been striving hard to promote and inculcate in the minds of teachers and students the idea of critical thinking. I think that is the theme upon which we are trying to build our case, that how we can actually make our education system more vibrant, and how we can actually promote the idea of scientific, to create scientific skills in our learning teaching. And I think by saying it, I hope that you have also enjoyed our session as well. And I can see your smile, because you see, you have actually, you have really talked in a very, candid once again, and with the hope that we can actually, have your views, and we can have your, such learned, sessions again and again. Thank you once again from our organization PAS. And there is another some assistants, and who have been partner organization, that is the society, which is also promoting the idea of scientific learning in our overall education system. So thank you once again, and I once again say thanks to you on the behalf of PAS, and a lovely session. And I would once again appreciate and thank who have spared their precious time and who have attended this session. And we hope that you would once again grace yourself in such sessions and make it a good kind of tradition in actually overall learning and teaching exercise. Thank you once again. I hope that everybody has enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure, for sure.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Okay, before we say goodbye to our worthy guests, let me make a little announcement. This webinar is being recorded. The recorded version will be uploaded on YouTube. So if somebody has missed any part of this beautiful talk, he or she can go and watch that recorded version on YouTube. Thank you so much, Dr. Jasson, for joining us, for giving us this beautiful talk. Thank you so much, and goodbye. And I say goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.